In the dying months of World War II, as Tokyo burned beneath waves of American firebombs, a strange rumor spread among Japanese pilots. A massive silver ghost had fallen from the skies. They said it wasn't just a bomber. It was a fortress that could cross oceans, the B-29 Superfortress, a machine so advanced the Japanese believed it was almost supernatural. No Japanese fighter could reach its altitude, no anti-aircraft gun could bring it down, yet, somehow, one had crash-landed, intact. When Japanese soldiers approached the wreck, they couldn't believe their eyes. The metal wasn't like theirs. The engines were enormous, smooth, powerful, almost alien. Every rivet whispered a level of precision they had never seen. Tokyo's top engineers were ordered to study it immediately. It was secretly transported under armed guard to a secure airbase. Only a few were allowed to even look at it. To them, it was more than an enemy plane. It was a window into the future. When they opened the cockpit, silence fell. The controls were unlike anything in Japanese planes: electric switches, advanced radar systems, pressurized cabin. One engineer whispered, "This isn't just technology. It's another world." Soon, Japan's best test pilots were summoned. Their mission was simple: to fly the captured B-29 and report its secrets. None of them realized they were about to experience something that would shake their faith in their entire war machine. On the morning of the test flight, the sun rose over a quiet airfield. The silver bomber stood alone, motionless, flawless, defiant. The pilot took a deep breath, climbed aboard, and ran his fingers over the throttle that once burned Tokyo. As the engines roared to life, the ground trembled. The hangar doors shook. For a brief moment, everyone felt it. The power of an empire they could never match. Japan had captured the enemy's greatest weapon, but not its secret. The bomber's remains were hidden in an underground hangar outside Tokyo, a place that officially didn't exist. Inside, Japan's top engineers gathered around the silver giant, their faces half-lit by single hanging bulbs. The air was thick with smoke and whispers. Every rivet, every wire, every gauge was a mystery. They had built thousands of planes, yet nothing like this. The bomber wasn't just metal. It was a code they couldn't read. When the first engineer, Dr. Hayato Nishina, opened one of the B-29's engines, his voice trembled. "This machine, it's alive." The engine's design was so precise that even the oil lines seemed crafted by artists, not soldiers. Its propeller blades, larger than any in Japanese service, gleamed like mirrors. For hours, the team compared it to their own engines and concluded the truth they feared most: Japan was fighting a war 10 years behind. In the cockpit, the radio systems stunned them. They discovered encryption devices, advanced transponders, and a pressurized cabin with oxygen circulation. One engineer muttered, "Even their pilots breathe better than ours." The room fell silent again. The captured bomber revealed not only how far behind Japan was, but how unstoppable America had become. It was more than defeat. It was revelation. Late that night, as the team continued their research, an explosion was heard outside. Guards rushed in. One of the engines had mysteriously caught fire. Yet, strangely, the flames didn't spread. The engineers watched in awe as the metal barely blackened. It was alloy beyond anything they knew, lighter than steel, stronger than iron. Some believed it wasn't man-made. Others whispered it was the ghost's curse. By dawn, their reports were complete. 300 pages of secrets, sketches, and admiration. The project was sealed under the codename Kokumon, message from the sky. But fate had other plans. Before their research could reach Tokyo Command, the city was bombed again. The hangar burned, the engineers vanished, and the silver bomber's remains melted into history. What they discovered would never be seen again, until decades later. The bomber had become more than just a captured enemy aircraft. It was a legend wrapped in metal. Every man who worked on it, from the lowest mechanic to the senior engineer, spoke about it in hushed tones. They called it the Sky Demon. To the Japanese, it represented everything they feared and admired about their enemy: the cold precision, the industrial might, and the terrifying efficiency. For weeks, it had sat in the corner of the airbase, covered by sheets, guarded day and night. Mechanics who worked on it claimed they could hear faint ticking sounds inside the fuselage at night, as if the plane's heart still beat even after death. Some even refused to approach it after sunset. But the orders from Tokyo were absolute. Make it fly again. Teams of engineers and test pilots arrived from across the empire. They studied every inch of its design, from the colossal engines to the strange electrical wiring that seemed more advanced than anything Japan had built. Every screw, every circuit, every inch of the fuselage was drawn, documented, and debated. One young mechanic whispered to another, "If we could build 10 of these, we could win the war." His supervisor slapped him gently on the back of the head. "We won't build 10, he said softly. "We'll be lucky if we understand even one." Finally, after weeks of round-the-clock work, the bomber was ready. The morning of the flight arrived with a quiet, eerie stillness. The sun was just beginning to rise over the misty airfield, painting the horizon in gold and red. The massive silver plane glistened like a sleeping giant, its wings stretching wide over the ground crew below. Soldiers, engineers, and officers gathered silently, their breath visible in the cold dawn air. Captain Masaru Kato stepped forward, a man known not for his recklessness, but for his precision. He was calm, tall, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived too many missions to fear death anymore. He bowed once toward the flag, then toward the aircraft. His boots echoed softly on the steel ladder as he climbed toward the cockpit. Every eye on the base followed his movements. He paused at the top of the ladder and placed a hand on the side of the aircraft. "If you truly are alive," he whispered, "then let's fly together." The engines had been refitted, the radio replaced, and the instruments half-translated by hand. Still, the bomber was mostly foreign, a living thing that spoke a different language. The mechanic stepped back as Kato took his seat, adjusting the straps on the American-style harness. The cockpit smelled of oil, dust, and something faintly metallic, like blood and salt. The first attempt to start the engines failed. The propellers groaned, turning only half a rotation before coughing to silence. A few soldiers exchanged nervous glances. Kato exhaled slowly, then adjusted a few switches, following the diagram taped to the dashboard. He tried again. This time the sound was deafening. The engines roared to life, one after another, until the entire hangar trembled. Tools rattled, paper flew off tables, and a nearby window cracked from the vibration. The ground crew instinctively covered their ears, but none stepped back. Everyone wanted to witness this. The moment when a Japanese pilot would tame the American beast. As smoke billowed from the exhausts, Kato checked his instruments. The gauges flickered. Air pressure steady, temperature rising, fuel levels full. He eased the throttle forward. The plane inched forward, its massive tires crunching over gravel. The sound was unlike any aircraft they had ever heard. Deep, powerful, alive. It wasn't just noise, it was presence. When the bomber reached the end of the runway, the signal flare shot into the air. Colonel Sato, the commanding officer, watched through his binoculars, his jaw clenched tight. "He has one task," he told his adjutant quietly. "Take off, circle twice, and return. If he fails, we destroy the wreck. No second chances," the engines screamed. The plane surged forward, dust exploding beneath its wheels. The crowd held its breath. The bomber sped faster, faster. until it became a silver blur. Then, with one final burst of power, the nose lifted, and the monster rose into the air. Cheers erupted from the runway. Men threw their caps into the air. One engineer fell to his knees in relief, laughing uncontrollably. Even Colonel Sato smiled for the first time in months. The bomber climbed higher, banking gracefully into the sunrise, its massive wings slicing through the orange sky. Kato's voice came through the radio. Altitude 2,000, climbing steady. Engines 1 and 2 normal. 4 slightly unstable. I'm reducing throttle. Copy that, replied the tower. Maintain course and report every minute. From the ground, the silver plane looked majestic, unstoppable, the enemy's weapon now flying under Japan's flag. But in the cockpit, things were far less perfect. The gauges trembled. The left engine began to rattle. The vibration grew, shaking the seat beneath Kato. He tightened his grip on the controls, muttering, "Stay with me, old ghost. Stay with me." For 20 minutes, the flight remained stable. Then, silence. The radio crackled once, then nothing. The officers at the tower exchanged nervous looks. "Try again," said Sato. "Contact him." The operator twisted the dials, static screaming through the speakers. "No response, sir." Up in the sky, the bomber began to drift. Smoke poured from its left wing. The right engine faltered. Kato fought with the controls, trying to stabilize, but the aircraft refused to obey. Fuel pressure dropping, losing power. His words came through faintly, drowned in static. The bomber dropped altitude, dipping dangerously low. From the airfield below, men could only watch helplessly as the massive shape disappeared into a bank of clouds. Then, a flash of light on the horizon. Seconds later, a deep rumble rolled through the valley. The engineers looked at each other in stunned silence. No one spoke. Hours later, a search team found the crash site deep within the forests outside Chiba. The trees were torn apart, the ground scorched, and the fuselage shattered across the hillside. But there was something strange. The cockpit was empty. Kato's parachute was never found. His radio helmet lay on the ground, burned around the edges, but still intact. In the days that followed, strange rumors spread across the base. Some claimed they saw a silver shape flying over Tokyo the next night. Silent, unmarked, reflecting moonlight like a ghost. Others said the bomber's engines could still be heard in the distance on quiet nights. Colonel Sato ordered all records sealed and the wreckage buried. Officially, the test never happened. Unofficially, it became a legend. They called it the Flight of the Ghost. And even today, long after the war ended, local fishermen still report hearing the faint echo of propellers over the bay, when there's no plane in sight. It started with a sound, not a bomb, not a gunshot, but a faint, irregular pulse carried through the Pacific static. It was April 4th, 1945, just days after the firebombing of Tokyo. Inside a dimly lit bunker near the Chiba coast, Japanese radio technician Sergeant Hiroto Arai sat hunched over a receiver, headphones pressed tight against his ears. His eyes were fixed on the frequency meter, which had begun flickering erratically. What he heard wasn't the usual Allied chatter. It was something else. Between bursts of static, a voice whispered, distorted, struggling through interference. Arai froze, turned up the gain and listened again. The message repeated twice before fading completely. "Do not send help. We are already beneath. No coordinates. No call sign. Just that one cryptic sentence." He wrote it down in his logbook, his hands trembling slightly, and marked the frequency, 17.27 MHz. When he reported it to his commanding officer, the response was cold and dismissive. "Allied trickery," they said. But Arai wasn't convinced. That night, when everyone else had left, he tuned back in. The signal was still there, and this time, he swore he could hear something breathing through the static. The next morning, the base commander ordered the logs sealed. "No mention of foreign transmissions," he said. We're at war, not chasing ghosts. But curiosity has a way of surviving silence. For the next 3 nights, Arai stayed behind after curfew, recording fragments of the signal on magnetic tape. Each night, the transmission began at exactly 2:37 a.m., lasting for 7 minutes. It never changed. The same distorted voice, the same 7 words. But on the 4th night, something new appeared. A faint metallic echo beneath the voice, rhythmic, almost mechanical, like sonar. Japan didn't have underwater listening stations in that region. Not then. So how could this sound exist? Arai brought his tapes to a naval engineer, Captain Mizuno, who analyzed the frequency. "It's not a radio wave," he said. "It's coming from beneath the sea floor." Mizuno proposed an explanation, perhaps a collapsed submarine still transmitting. But as they listened again, they both realized the truth. The voice wasn't pleading. It was warning. A week later, an order came from Tokyo. The entire Chiba installation was to be evacuated. The government had designated the coastline a restricted testing zone. Only Arai and a handful of engineers were allowed to remain. By the time the American occupation began months later, the site was gone, completely erased. The concrete radar domes had collapsed inward, their antennas twisted like wire. U.S. forces found remnants of Japanese documents scattered through the sand, including fragments of Arai's final report. One line stood out among the ruins. Subject stabilized. Transmission continuous. Depth unconfirmed. The Americans initially assumed subject referred to a human experiment, but that theory quickly fell apart. None of the recovered documents mentioned prisoners. Instead, they referenced something called Phase Delta 7, a project under the Imperial Research Bureau, dedicated not to weapons, but sound. Specifically, deep resonance communication through conductive saltwater. In early 1946, American intelligence established a secret recovery program, later codenamed Operation Deep Echo. A joint team of U.S. Navy and OSS officers traveled to Chiba to locate the signal source. What they found was unnerving. The primary bunker was half submerged, its lower levels filled with brackish water. Inside, they discovered twisted steel, glass panels melted from extreme heat, and old magnetic reels still intact. When played, they emitted a distorted hum that seemed to fluctuate like a heartbeat. One engineer, Lieutenant James Calloway, reported hearing faint whispering layered beneath the static. He described it as a low voice speaking in patterns too structured to be random. The team's translator noted that the rhythm resembled old Imperial Naval Code, but the intervals were too long, too deliberate. They also found a sealed chamber labeled Bio Unit 03. Inside were 4 metal containers. Each had been pried open from the inside. Officially, the Americans declared the site a chemical storage facility. Unofficially, samples from the bunker were sent to the Naval Research Laboratory in California. Over the next year, technicians working with the materials began reporting the same auditory hallucinations. Breathing, tapping, muffled voices calling from the ocean. One of the scientists even documented a recurring dream of standing on a coastline, staring into dark water, hearing that same message in perfect English. Do not send help. We are already beneath. The tapes from Chiba were later sealed under classified level black. Only one copy was ever known to exist, kept in an archive under Pearl Harbor's Pacific Monitoring Division. By 1953, similar transmissions began resurfacing. This time, they weren't coming from Japan, but from the Mariana Trench, thousands of miles away. Sonar operators on U.S. submarines USS Tang and USS Cochino logged hearing rhythmic pulses identical to the Chiba signal, repeating every 72 seconds. When cross-referenced, all data traced back to the same frequency, 17.27 MHz. The Navy quickly classified it as unexplained deep-sea interference. but insiders within the intelligence community believed otherwise. "It followed our vessels," one officer wrote in a declassified memo. "It's tracking us." During the Cold War, the Chiba transmissions became legend, whispered among sonar operators, dismissed by command. But one incident broke that silence. In 1962, while surveying near Guam, a deep-sea microphone recorded what was described as human breath-modulating sonar frequencies. When slowed down, the voice was unmistakable. Same tone, same phrase. The signal lasted 11 minutes, then vanished forever. To this day, the tape is preserved in the Naval Archives under the tag Chiba 17. Modern analysts claim it's just an anomaly, a product of natural seismic resonance. But those who have heard it in person say otherwise. They describe the sound as conscious, deliberate, alive. Today, the coastline of Chiba looks ordinary. Fishermen cast nets, waves roll endlessly. But if you walk along the shore during low tide, you can still see the remains of rusted steel embedded in the rocks. Locals call them the listening spikes. And sometimes, when the fog thickens, old men swear their radios flicker back to life, whispering the same chilling line: "Do not send help. We are already beneath." Historians label it as a ghost signal, a remnant of overlapping frequencies from the war. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying, because every few years the signal spikes again. And every time it does, another diver disappears near Chiba. By late April 1945, as Berlin burned and Hitler's Reich crumbled, Allied intelligence began receiving strange shortwave transmissions. They weren't from Germany, nor Japan. They seemed to come from somewhere in the middle of the North Atlantic. Coded messages repeating a single phrase: "Convoy Echo," en route to Haven. No Allied records mentioned any Convoy Echo. It was as if an entire fleet had appeared out of nowhere. A U.S. Navy signals unit aboard the USS Indianapolis triangulated the source. The coordinates pointed to a region infamous for magnetic interference and compass errors. Near the same area, modern maps call the Bermuda Triangle. Admiral King authorized a small task group to investigate, labeling it Routine Recon Mission Delta 47. None of those ships would ever return. Days later, a British patrol aircraft flying from Bermuda spotted something unsettling. Large shadows beneath the waves, shaped like transport vessels, moving slowly in formation. But no ships were visible on the surface. The pilot, Flight Officer Harris, reported seeing flashes of light deep underwater, like lanterns on a submerged convoy. His radio went silent mid-sentence. When divers from the USS Hawkins arrived at the coordinates, they found something impossible. Steel hull fragments dated 1943, covered in coral, lying 12,000 feet below. But the radio signals were still transmitting from that depth, repeating the same cryptic line every 30 minutes. Convoy Echo, en route to Haven. The Navy sealed all records under classified anomaly. In 1952, a declassified memo surfaced in Project Blue file archives. A German U-boat captain, captured in May 1945, had mentioned Operation Haven, a rumored Nazi evacuation plan for scientists and high officials. He described a fleet that departed Norway with secret cargo, bound for an undisclosed base in the Western Ocean. His last words during interrogation were chilling. They found the door, and it opened. Satellite imaging decades later, in 1978, revealed unnatural geometric formations on the seabed near those same coordinates. Pentagon analysts believed it might be remnants of wrecks, but a few classified photos show the outlines of fully intact vessels, perfectly aligned, as if waiting. The files were labeled Deep Echo Structures, then abruptly erased from public archives. In 1999, an American research submersible reported brief contact with a sonar reflection that responded intelligently, like an echo that timed itself to the ping. The crew panicked and surfaced immediately. The only thing recorded was an eerie audio distortion that, when slowed down, contained fragments of Morse code spelling. Haven reached, still alive. To this day, Convoy Echo remains one of WWII's most persistent mysteries. Some historians dismiss it as wartime confusion or faulty radar readings. But others, including Navy analysts, believe a hidden fleet might have slipped into a dimensional anomaly, carrying with it the last secret of the Third Reich. The ocean still hums with the same frequency, repeating across time, a ghost signal that refuses to die. The ocean was silent. The war had ended, but somewhere beyond the Atlantic's dark horizon, something refused to die. Naval operators still reported hearing faint pulses on the restricted 17.7 MHz frequency, the same one that had been blacklisted since 1944. Inside the Pentagon's Signal Analysis Wing, officers took turns listening through the static, convinced it was just leftover interference from the war. Yet, every few hours, the signal would stabilize for a few seconds, and in that fleeting moment, a rhythmic pulse emerged. Not mechanical, not random. It sounded almost like breathing. The technicians named it Echo 6. But when one of them reversed the audio, his face turned pale. The pattern wasn't random at all. It spelled out coordinates. February 1946, the USS Valkyrie, a newly recommissioned warship disguised as a hydrographic research vessel, left port under sealed orders. Only 12 men on board knew the true purpose of the mission: to trace the origin of Deep Echo. The ship's decks smelled of oil and salt. The cold Atlantic wind cut through the steel like knives. Commander William Hensley, the same officer who had first recorded the mysterious wartime signal, had been pulled out of retirement for this voyage. His superiors told him it was just a retrieval mission. But Hensley knew better. He'd heard that sound before. The distorted hum that made every hair on his arm stand upright. He remembered how entire convoys vanished after it was first detected. And as the Valkyrie pushed deeper into the triangle's coordinates, he began to feel that same oppressive silence settle across the sea, as if the ocean itself were listening. On the sixth night, the air turned electric. The crew's instruments began to fail one by one. Compasses spun wildly. The radio hissed with endless static. Then, without warning, the main antenna came alive. A slow, rhythmic transmission bled through. One long pulse, then two short bursts. It matched the Deep Echo file exactly. But this time, there was something else beneath the noise. When the sound engineers filtered out the distortion, a voice emerged. It was broken, distant, drowning in static, yet unmistakably human. "We are not gone." Every man on deck froze. Hensley demanded a trace. The source came from a depth of 18,400 feet, a place the maps marked as a trench. But sonar scans revealed something far stranger. A metallic shape, roughly the size of a battleship, motionless on the ocean floor. The Valkyrie launched its experimental submersible, Deep Search 1, to investigate. It descended through miles of freezing black water, its lights cutting narrow cones through the darkness. The deeper it went, the stranger the readings became. Pressure gauges flickered. Temperature sensors spiked and dropped. At 17,000 feet, the sonar picked up faint outlines. Long corridors, twisted hulls, shattered turrets. But as the sub neared 18,000 feet, a clearer image appeared. The wreck of a U.S. destroyer, its structure still intact, lights faintly glowing within. It was impossible. The ship had been missing since 1944. Hensley's voice trembled over the comms. "Is it transmitting?" The operator nodded, his face drained of color. The signal was coming from inside the wreck. When the sub's floodlights illuminated the destroyer's bridge, they saw movement inside. Slow, drifting shadows, shaped like men. Uniforms were still intact, insignias visible. But the faces were pale, lifeless, yet their eyes were open, staring back at the camera. The entire crew froze in silence as the feed began to distort. The sonar started echoing back their own transmission, only slower, like an imitation. Then suddenly, it shifted pitch, becoming a perfect copy of Hensley's voice. "This is Valkyrie Command. Identifying anomaly. This is Valkyrie Command." The machine was repeating them, word for word. Moments later, the sub's lights flickered and the feed went black. The connection was lost. The Valkyrie's crew scrambled to restore the link. Static filled every channel. Then, faintly, the voice returned. But it wasn't the sub crew. It was someone else, something else. "We hear you. Do not follow." The words echoed through the speakers like whispers from a cave. Suddenly, every radar screen on the Valkyrie lit up. A second signal had appeared. Massive, moving, rising fast from the abyss. Within seconds, the ship's hull began to vibrate, instruments went dark, and a blinding flash erupted from beneath the water. The last transmission received from the Valkyrie was a single phrase: "It's beneath us." Then, silence. No wreckage was ever found. 3 weeks later, a fisherman near Iceland discovered an empty life raft drifting in the fog. Inside was a metal container with a half-damaged film reel. When restored, it revealed the last sonar image transmitted by the Valkyrie. A colossal circular structure resting on the seafloor, pulsing with rhythmic light, as if alive. Engineers estimated it was nearly a kilometer wide, too perfect to be natural. Some claimed it was a sunken base. Others said it was something older, something buried long before men learned to sail. The Navy classified the film within hours, and every surviving copy was seized. Decades passed, and the story of Operation Deep Echo faded into rumor. But in 1979, a Soviet trawler intercepted a faint rhythmic pulse while sailing through the same region. Western analysts confirmed a 97% match to the original 1944 signal. Both nations denied involvement. Yet, in 2018, amateur radio operators again detected the same frequency. The pulse repeating every 11 hours, perfectly synchronized with tidal shifts. When slowed down, the sound revealed faint, human-like syllables. Some say it's interference, others believe it's still transmitting from that forgotten trench. A message not from the past, but from whatever lies beneath it. And if you listen closely, through the static, you might still hear it whisper, "We are still here."